Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Cornerstone Home Inspection Education Center. Usually we have webinars on the first and third Tuesday, but tonight we are doing the second Tuesday, and we have King Jones from Connecticut Pest Solutions, and he is going to be giving a presentation tonight for the next hour on wood-destroying insects. Welcome, and I'll hand it over to King.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jim, for the introduction, and thank you for the Home Inspectors Association for inviting me to speak. I know we only have an hour. There's quite a bit of information to cover within this hour, so I would like to try to cover as much as possible. And if you could just leave your questions to the end, that would be great. Let's get started. So, wood-destroying insects. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover what are wood-destroying insects, the type of wood-destroying insects, how to perform an inspection, the suggested guidelines for filling out an NPMA 33 form, which I know is more relevant to what you guys do, and some of the changes and revisions to the NPMA 33 form from maybe about 3 years ago now. So what are wood-destroying insects? So basically, wood-destroying insects are insects that cause damage to wood, whether it be the adults or whether it be the larvae. If they feed off the wood or if they nest in the wood, that would be considered a wood-destroying insect. Wood-destroying insects can also be beneficial creatures as well. So for instance, you have your carpenter bee here. This is a wood-destroying insect, but it is a very beneficial insect as well. So the types of wood-destroying insects. So you have your carpenter ants, you have your carpenter bees, you have your termites, and your wood-boring beetles. Those are the main wood-destroying insects that we deal with here in the Northeast. So let's start off with carpenter ants. So your carpenter ants are basically found throughout the United States. Typically, they're black. Most people describe them as the larger black ants, but they come in red, brown, a combination of black and brown. Typically about a 1/2 inch to a 5/8 inch in size. They can have very large colonies, up to 3,000 workers. And also you can have multiple satellite colonies within a structure or close to a structure. Typically the swarmers are produced about a year or two in advance. So by the time a person sees swarmers or you actually see swarmers inside the structure, those guys were produced about a year or two before, and they just started to release those swarmers a year or two later. Mating typically occurs during the swarming season, and then the females basically break off their wings and they start a new nest. So that's basically what the carpenter ant swarmers are, and that's pretty general for what swarmers are in general. So you have termite swarmers as well. And they pretty much behave the same way. That's the purpose of swarmers, basically to start a new colony. But those are your carpenter ants. So habits of carpenter ants. So your carpenter ants will like to nest in decayed wood. They particularly would like wood that's damaged by moisture. Wood that's damaged by moisture is soft. Carpenter ants do not consume the wood. They nest in the wood. Which is in contrast to what termites do. We'll get to that. But carpenter ants they'll nest in the wood. They don't consume the wood, which means that as they excavate the wood, they have to deposit it somewhere. So typically you'll find what's called frass, which looks like kind of sawdust. So the frass you might find, by a windowsill or underneath a baseboard in a room, or sometimes even on the exterior. And sometimes in that frass, what you'll find are dead particles from the carpenter ants as well. They're cannibalistic, and they tend to bring their comrades back to their colony. And then you will find particles of the carpenter ants within the frass. Not all the time will you see frass, but that is a huge indicator that you're dealing with carpenter ants as opposed to dealing with termites. Other than that, carpenter ants will feed on insect honeydew, plants, sweets and sugars, just like any other typical ant. They can forage up to 300 feet. So you can have a colony that's in a stump or you can have a colony that's pretty close to the structure, and it will seem like the colony is inside the structure. They are typically active in the evening, typically at night, from 10 to 2 o'clock in the morning. So your carpenter ant damage. So when you're doing an inspection and you're looking for wood destroying insects, carpenter ant damage, like I said, you kind of have an idea of where the damage would be based off of maybe a moisture problem. However, not all the time you will find carpenter ants damaging or consume or nesting in wood that's been damaged by water. They typically like to because it's softer, but not all the time. But the damage looks a little clean. If you look at those galleries in that photo, like I said, they excavate the wood because they nest in the wood. And so you'll find the galleries to be clean. In contrast to termites, where you'll find soil in the galleries. You'll find sawdust in the galleries sometimes. And again, you'll sometimes find particles from carpenter ants within those galleries as well. Like I said, most of the time, we're going to go for wood that's been damaged by water. Doesn't necessarily need to be a large leak or a major water issue. Sometimes it can be a small leak over a long period of time, which, most of us know that tends to be the worst. A lot of areas where you tend to find carpenter ant damage tend to be door frames, window frames, roof fascias, soffits, things of that nature. Kitchens tend to be common as well, and sometimes bathrooms. Let's see. So then you have your carpenter bees. These are a lot easier to identify and distinguish from your bumblebees, your carpenter bees. If you look at the photo, the carpenter bees, the back end is shiny, where your bumblebees kind of look a little furry. These guys are about the same size as your bumblebee. They're about a half inch to an inch. They're pretty large. Sometimes they can be a little intimidating, but they're not aggressive at all. Carpenter bees, like I said, aren't social insects. They will attack wood that is not treated, so not painted, not stained. They tend to attack fascias and soffits. They drill a hole about a nice quarter hole. Sometimes you will see frass on the side of the house, kind of similar to what carpenter ants do with their frass. They deposit it out, but carpenter bees kind of kick it back, and it's actually mixed with their saliva as they burrow through that wood. And I'll show you some examples of what some of that damage looks like. So here's a photo of what carpenter bee damage would look like. You see the nice drilled holes right into the wood there. Although this wood looks like it's painted, looks like it hasn't been painted in quite some time. So if the finish has deteriorated, yes, they will go through that wood. The cutout that you see down below is from the carpenter bees. They go in and they'll take a sharp left or a sharp right turn. And that's that turn along that surface of that wood. It becomes thin. And that's where you end up with that cutout kind of in the wood. Now, if you look at the holes on the right-hand side, you can see that those holes look a little jagged. Now, those holes are from woodpeckers. So the hole on the top left-hand corner is a nice, clean drilled hole. The holes on the right-hand side look a little jagged. Those are from woodpeckers. Kind of like carpenter ants and wood that's been damaged by moisture. You tend to find woodpeckers going after the larvae of the carpenter bees. So it's very common to find wood that's been damaged by carpenter bees along with woodpecker damage kind of in the same area. And a lot of times it actually gets misidentified as carpenter bee damage, but usually you tend to find carpenter bees within that area as well. So here's another photo of an example of what carpenter bee damage or the frass in this case would look like. This case is hard to see the damage, but the actual damage is on the underside of the fascia. So the part of the fascia that's actually facing the house is where the carpenter bee damage is. Now that area, I got to say, is real common, partly because it's hard to get to paint or stain. So most people will paint the surface that you can physically see, the bottom surface of that fascia. A lot of people will not get to that back end that faces a house, and that's where you typically find most of your carpenter bee damage because that area is not painted or stained. And then you tend to find the frass on the house. So if you look at that photo, that's what you see on the house is the actual frass from the carpenter bees boring into the wood and kicking the frass back into the house. So, and then you have your termites. So we're very fortunate in this region of the country deal with subterranean termites. Thank God, because drywood termites are a nightmare. Formosan termites are a nightmare, and the approach is completely different. But subterranean termites, they can have very large colonies. You can have multiple colonies on a lot. And the reason why I say on a lot is because carpenter ants, or I'm sorry, termites are not like carpenter ants. Carpenter ants will nest in the wood. Termites, their colonies are located in the soil. So if a structure has a problem with termites, the colony is not located in the wood. The colony is actually located in the soil. And when we get down to talking about treatments, it'll make more sense why a termite treatment is done the way it is, because the colony is in the soil as opposed to carpenter ants where the colony is in the structure or in the wood. So subterranean termites, this picture here are workers. The yellowish guys here, the cream guys here that are all cream are your workers. The ones with the mandibles on the top are your soldiers, and those guys are meant to protect the colony. So you also have termite swarmers as well. As I said earlier, carpenter ants swarm, termites swarm as well, and in general, swarmers are produced for the same reason. Swarmers are produced so that the colony can expand, and they basically produce the swarmers once the colonies reach a certain capacity, so that way they can start a new colony, essentially a satellite colony from the primary colony. In most cases, most people tend to notice they have a termite problem when either they are doing construction or they see these ants with wings. Most people will describe them as ants with wings. Don't take it for granted. A lot of people don't know the difference between a termite swarm or a carpenter ant swarm, and also pavement ants and citronella ant swarm as well. So, there is a difference between swarmers, but they all tend to swarm around the same time of the year as well. So you do have to be careful with that. But most homeowners will tend to notice that they have a termite problem when they actually see these swarmers. And in some cases, it may go on for years. They may clean it up. They might buy Raid and spray with Raid because they think they're just ants. And then after year 1 or year 2 of doing this, they finally realize that they might have a more serious problem than what they thought. So, and that's part of the reason why termites can be more destructive than carpenter ants. So, if you have a carpenter ant colony in your house or within 300 feet of your house, most people tend to know. You see the carpenter ants walking around. You might find them in your kitchen, find them on your counter, all over the house. You know you have a problem. Termites are a little bit different. So, because termites, the colony is located in the soil, unless you're looking specifically for activity or looking specifically for damage, and you have been trained to know where to look and how to look, most of the time, as I said earlier, you're not going to find this unless you have swarmers. And so that's part of the reason why termites are more destructive than carpenter ants, just on the bare fact that you just typically won't see it unless you have swarmers. Now, in order for a termite colony to produce swarmers and to reach that capacity to produce swarmers, it typically would take anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So, right off the bat, if you go into a property and you find termite swarmers, you know that they've had a problem for at least 3 to 5 years. Like I said, the colony is located in the ground. Termites, subterranean termites, need to keep in contact with the soil for moisture. So that kind of gives us a little bit of an advantage as opposed to your drywood termites or opposed to your Formosan termites. So because subterranean termites need to keep in contact with the soil, that means in order for termites to attack a piece of wood that is not in direct contact with soil, they'd have to build an access. Those accesses are called mud tubes. A mud tube will provide access from the soil to the source of food, which would be anything made out of cellulose. In most cases, I mean, I've seen, wood from books to paper to cardboard to sheetrock, anything made out of cellulose, the termites will consume. And in contrast to carpenter ants, termites consume the wood, they consume the cellulose. Carpenter ants, again, will nest in the wood. So that means that you don't really have any debris from the wood that you're looking for. But what you will find, because subterranean termites need to keep in contact with the soil, is you will find soil or dirt or mud. So if you notice in that picture, you see some workers, you see some soldiers, the guys with the mandibles there, and then you see the soil there. Part of the reason why they build that soil is for shelter, to basically protect them from exposure to the elements. Like I said, they need to keep in contact with the soil, the moisture, the soil for the moisture to survive, also to protect them from predators as well. So that's a big distinguishing characteristic when you go to look for damage, is you're going to find the presence of soil or dirt within that damage, because subterranean termites need to keep in contact with the soil for moisture. And again, in order for them to access wood that is not in direct contact with soil, they have to build the mud tube somewhere. Now, sometimes those mud tubes are exposed, right? Sometimes you might find a mud tube on the inside of a foundation. Sometimes you might find it on the exterior of a foundation. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're not visible. As myself, I'm in a finished basement. They might be behind a finished wall. Sometimes they might be in between a mortar joint of a cinder block foundation. Or sometimes a customer may have a brick veneer and the mud and it's direct contact with the soil, and you might have mud tubes going behind that brick veneer. So it's important to understand how and where termites or where carpenters are going to, because this will help aid you in your inspection. It'll help expedite the inspection process. You wouldn't be looking, for carpenter bees and a sill plate, right? So mud tubes. Here's a couple pictures of what mud tubes will look like. So if you start with the picture on the far right, that's a picture of mud tubes coming down vertically from a header of a opening to a bilco door in a basement. So the termites are in the soil adjacent to the framing of the header, and they're working their way up and across that header. And they're actually in between the two headers. So if you were doing an inspection on this property and you weren't able to actually see those mud tubes coming down, where you need to look is actually in between its two sister joists. And if you see the presence of soil there, then chances are you have termites. And you can follow that soil to where it connects to the finished grade. So the picture in the middle, again, mud tubes. You can see the mud tubes up against the subfloor, in between the floor joist and the subfloor there, and inside the damage as well. So big distinguishing characteristic of what subterranean termite damage would look like as opposed to what carpenter ant damage would look like. The photo on the far left, that's a mud tube as well. If you can tell if a mud tube is active or inactive, is if you scrape the mud tube, you'll get that. You'll get termite workers going back and forth within that mud tube. And if you wait long enough, it'll clear out. And then you'll start to get those workers with the mandibles coming out to protect the colony. And if you go back in about 3 or 4 days, they'll probably rebuild that broken mud tube, and they'll be right back to work. So termite damage can be very extensive because of the lack of indicators that are as obvious as carpenter ants. They can cause, according to the National Pest Management Association, termites cause up to $5 billion in damage each year. Like I said, they're like the silent destroyers. They eat mostly spring wood. They tend to leave the harder summer wood. I have seen them demolish hardwood floors. The damage is typically going to be from the inside. So when you're looking at a hardwood floor, you're not going to necessarily know that there's termite damage because you have that polyurethane on the top, you have that finish stain on the top, and you might see little small holes. The way you can tell is if you probe at that wood, it'll open up, and you can open that piece of wood up a little bit, and you'll see that soil in there, and that's where the damage is going to be. The damage is going to be right in the inside, but on the surface, it might look like there's no damage at all. The photo on the left, that's a door frame that was opened up, and there was some termite damage in between there. The photo on the right, that's a floor joist down in a basement where someone was getting ready to do some work, and they realized they had a termite problem as well. Then you have your wood-boring beetles. So there's a number of different types of wood-boring beetles. Powder post beetles tend to be the most common wood-boring beetles. They will infest wood timbers, typically your older wood timbers. I've actually seen furniture as well. Your older structures, barns, you'll see frass from these guys as well. But the quantity of frass is very small. These guys are really, really small, quarter of a size. And so the amount of frass that you get it's almost like talcum powder, and it's very small quantity. The holes, I might have a picture of the holes in the next slide, but the holes are almost like a pinhole, almost like you took a black Sharpie and just made a couple small pinholes in the wood. That's how small of a hole you're talking.
Like a thumbtack hole.
Like a thumbtack hole. Yep, pretty much. Yep, like a thumbtack hole. Yep. You'll see a ton of little small holes kind of all over the place. That's a huge indicator that, yeah, there's a wood-boring beetle problem. Do you typically need to identify what type of wood-boring beetles? No, not necessarily. Wood-boring beetles, so they're treated all the same way. But for inspection purposes, you just need to be able to identify carpenter ants, carpenter bees, termites, and wood-boring beetles. The damage is a little bit different as far as the size of the hole when it comes to different types of wood-boring beetles. However, the hole does look like a thumbtack hole, or someone took a black little Sharpie and just made a couple little dots in the wood. And so basically, wood-boring beetles, the larvae bore holes in the wood, then they pupate, and then they come out of the wood. The boring of the hole is what leaves the frass. It can be a little difficult to tell if it's active. And in most cases, you may have to go back to see if there's live activity. It would be great if you walked into a property and you saw frass on the ground. You know it's active, right? However, it also depends because crawl spaces, basements, and especially for the age of the house and the type of structures that tend to have carpenter woodborne beetle problems aren't frequent as much as some of the newer construction or newer homes. So you don't have a benchmark as to when it was cleaned and how long it's been there. But in most cases, if you do see frass, chances are it's probably active. You could mark the wood and then go back to see if the marking has expanded, or you can clean the frass and see if the frass has been, if new frass has shown up since you've done your inspections. So that's another way to tell as well. But typically, if you see, oh, here you go. This is a good picture of it. So if you can see the little small holes, I know it's might be a little difficult to see, but you see the little small pinholes there. That's all from woodborne beetles. And like I said, there's a ton of different type of woodborne beetles. There is a little bit of difference in some of the damage, but for the most case, it may be it may be a round hole, might be a little bit of an oval hole, but they all pretty much look the same and are similar in damage. They do attack the same type of wood, mostly hardwoods. One of the other big distinguishing characteristics with all types of woodborne beetle is the moisture content. They typically like a higher moisture content, usually around the 25 to 30% moisture content mark. And like I said, the structure, usually the older structures tend to, barns and, homes that were built in the early 1900s, you tend to find this most of the time in crawl spaces, most of the time in basements. I have seen them inside living spaces, reconditioned barns, turn into a major living space. You tend to find them. But those tend to be the most distinguishing characteristics when you're looking for a woodborne beetle problem. So, if you go into a property that was built in, I don't know, the 80s, chances are you're probably not going to find woodborne beetles there. Like I said, early 1900s, I'd really take a good look in those areas for woodborne beetles. Like I said, woodborne beetles, you get the frass underneath it. The age of the house, big indicator that you might be possibly dealing with woodborne beetles. The moisture content, you walk into a basement, high moisture content, chances are you may have an issue with woodborne beetles there as well. And then how do you do an inspection? So like I said, just knowing a little bit about those insects and a little bit about what they do, a little bit about their biology will help aid you in your inspection. So just knowing, hey, woodborne beetles, they're going to infest structures that are built in early 1900s, late to 1900s, the larger timbers, hardwood, higher moisture content. Then, if you walk into a property that was built in the 90s, chances are you're not going to find woodborne beetles there. Doesn't mean you don't look, but that's probably not going to be a problem. So inspection. So what do you need when you do an inspection? Obviously a flashlight, a probing tool, knee pads, a step ladder, and some coveralls. So the probing tube is important when it comes to doing a termite inspection. Like I said, you will find termite damage on the inside, and you won't know if there's actually a termite problem there unless you probe at that wood. When you go to probe at that wood, it'll go right through it. It'll almost feel like paper. It'll be paper thin, and you'll go right through it. And then you might want to pry it open a little bit, take a look at it. And then as you go further toward how the subterranean termites enter the structure, you'll tend to find more and more damage. So where do you inspect? So starting on the exterior, you see this gentleman looking on the bottom. He's looking for subterranean termites. You can find carpenter ants there as well, but subterranean termites, that's a big area where you're going to find your subterranean termites. Reason being, we know subterranean termites need to keep in contact with the soil for moisture. And so you tend to find subterranean termite damage where you find wood to ground contact, where you find joists that might be embedded into a foundation or a structure, where you find door frames, garage door frames. That's really common. you find a garage door frame embedded into the slab, you're going to want to check the bottom of that door frame for subterranean termites. That's easy access for them.
King, real quick on that one, I kind of wrote it down for the end. I'll go real fast. What about poured in place front steps? You know, a lot of times the precast and not so much, but those areas because they're so close to the sills. Is that what are some of the other areas when we're on the outside that we go, wow, this is a spot I got to look at when I go inside the structure?
So yes, not just poured in place, but even precast. So, and poured in place is a bigger risk because precast is a bigger risk. So when you have a slab adjacent to a structure, you can't see anything in between that structure and the stoop, right? And so you can have subterranean termites going in between the two structures and attacking that kick plate in, let's say, the front door or the back slider door there. And so that's a key area where you tend to find termites as well. And that could be poured in place or precast. Precast and poured in place, you tend to have soil right up against the structure there. And so your poured in place tend to be a little bit have a higher risk of having subterranean termites there. So you can have a kick plate that's this high, a stoop, and then your soil could be sitting right there. And so it's definitely easy access, and it can also be wood to ground contact there. However, you just don't see it because you have a stoop there, right? You have a poured in place, front stoop that you won't see. So definitely those are big areas: a front stoop, a rear stoop, any wood to ground contact, like you have here. You have siding directly right into the finished grade. Door frames, garage door frame are big. Even adjacent fireplaces. You have an exterior adjacent fireplace right up against the end of a structure. That's a big key area as well. And like I said before, with subterranean termites, foundation. What type of foundation do you have? Is it cinder block? Is it brick veneer? It's important to pay attention to that because although you might have a foundation or a siding that might be 2 feet from the finished grade, you could have subterranean termites going up behind that veneer into the first piece of framing member, sill plate, box head, or floor joist, right behind that siding. So yes, you do want to take a look at that, and you want to probe those areas. Decks. So columns, posts, fascias, and decks. Those areas, you're typically not looking for subterranean termites, carpenter bees. So I know we talked with carpenter bees, we talked about fascias and soffits. Those tend to be the most common, but also decks. Same thing, the underside of the handrail of the deck is a common area to find carpenter bees. Same reason most people don't paint or stain it. Out of sight, out of mind, until you have carpenter bees. So in the interior, here's a good infographic of where subterranean termites enter within the finished basement. So, or a basement in general, or even a slab. So you have your footer, in this case, cinder block construction, hollow block. So they can be going in between the hollow block as well and attack that sill plate. So where you're going to want to inspect is that first piece of framing member, that sill plate, that floor joist, that box header, and you're going to want to probe those areas. Same thing inside the foundation. You can see that mud tube that's on the inside of the foundation. This property also has a brick veneer. So the same thing, if you look on the exterior, you have that brick veneer, which that brick veneer in this case goes below the finished grade. So you can actually have the subterranean termites going up against the foundation, underneath that brick veneer, and right into that box header. Basement stairs. Basement stairs are common as well. So basement stairs, sometimes they're embedded in a slab. You're going to want to check that for subterranean termites. Expansion joints in between structures. We talked about the front stoop and the back stoop. But how about additions, right? You have an addition, you have a basement, you have a crawl space, you have a slab, you have expansion joints in between the two. I've seen plenty of houses where they have swarmers in the middle of the house. And as you go through and you start to figure out the type of construction and what's going on, I realize that, hey, you have two crawl spaces in the basement. The middle of your house is that expansion joint in between the crawl space, or that middle of the house is the expansion joint in between the basement. So that's how you end up with a unique situation. So you have to look at the structure and understand what type of structure it is, and how subterranean termites could access, or where the termite swarmers could be coming from. And then that's where you're going to want to really look and hone in on. So let's get into the NPMA 33 form. So the NPMA 33 form is the standard form for real estate transfers for wood destroying insects. So this form, I mean, you're only looking for wood destroying insects. So you're basically looking for, like I said, Carpenter ants, woodborne beetles, subterranean termites, and what do I miss? Carpenter ants, Carpenter bees. So Carpenter ants, Carpenter bees, woodborne beetles, and subterranean termites. That's it. You're looking for damage. You're looking for activity. That's all. So you just need to note your findings, visible damage, any evidence of wood destroying insects, whether it's live insects, whether it's dead insects as well, or damage, termite damage, carpenter ant damage, woodborne beetle damage, which would be the exit holes, frass, carpenter ants leave the frass, woodborne beetles will leave the frass, carpenter bees will leave frass. So any of those things you're going to want to indicate in your findings. And basically, if you do find evidence of wood destroying insects, you need to say what type of evidence you found, whether it's live insects, dead insects, or damage, and what type of insect, right? Or what type of damage, or what type of, frass, and where. Let's see. So your findings, we talked about live insects, frass, visible damage. Recommendations. So recommendations, no action or treatment recommended, or you recommend a treatment for the control of whatever type of wood destroying insect you found. Carpenter ants, carpenter bees, woodborne beetles. You don't need to say what type of treatment. You don't need to indicate there's multiple different type of treatments for subterranean termites. Same thing with carpenter ants or carpenter bees. You just need to recommend a treatment for the control of the type of pest that you found or damage that you found. So wood destroying insect treatment recommendations, like I said, you don't need to get granular with that. Wood destroying insect treatments, there are different types of treatments. You may even go to our property and actually find a baiting system in the ground, which is a type of termite treatment. I'm going to get into what you do with that a little bit later. There are some changes with the NPMA 33 form that happened about 3 years ago. But wood destroying insects or subterranean termites, you basically treat the soil. So you have a soil injection, or you can do a baiting system. You can install a baiting system. You're basically treating the colony that's in the soil. So soil injection, you may typically find marks in the concrete slab adjacent to the structure, the front stoop or the rear stoop. And those marks are 1/2-inch holes drilled through the slab in order for us to basically put a rod down in the soil and treat the soil adjacent to the slab. You may find bait stations around the structure, which kind of look like little round discs with plastic kind of in the ground. Those are all forms of a treatment. So you may see those. If you do, you're going to want to ask the homeowner or the property owner if they had a treatment before, and when they've had the treatment, and if they have any paperwork to show that they've had the treatment, and if it's under current guarantee. And I'll get into why that's important. So this is an example of what a liquid treatment is. You're basically treating the soil that's adjacent to the structure. So, like I said, carpenter ants, carpenter bees, woodborne beetles. That's you're going to be making a recommendation based upon those guys. Every inspection is different. There's definitely special situations, and you want to stick to the guidelines of the NPMA 33 form. I will say that obstructions and inaccessible areas should exist at every property. Everyone should be, checking off, main level attic, a fixed wall covering, right? Sheetrock. You have sheetrock, insulation in an attic. You should indicate that there's insulation in the attic. So, unless you're walking into a newly framed constructed property, chances are every property you go to, you should have some type of inaccessible area or obstruction. And basically here, you can just check that and you don't have to write in fixed ceiling or suspended ceiling. You can put a 1, 2, 3, and that will reference the key to the right. But like I said, every area should have it. Every property that you go to is typically going to have some type of obstruction or inaccessible area. You're going to check everything. You're going to check the basement. You're going to check the crawl space, the main level, the attic, the garage, the exterior, the porch, if there is one. And if there is, another addition as well, you should check all of those spaces. Although you may be going to a property and, property is built in, in the 90s, and that carpenter woodborne beetles may not be a problem. Do you still, check that area, or you check that basement, or you check that attic? Yes, you still should check it. Additional comments. This becomes important when it comes to previous treatments that were done or service agreements. So for instance, we were talking about earlier, if you notice the baiting system, or you notice that they've had a treatment before, you talk to the property owner, and the property owner says, yes, I do have a treatment. Great. When was it done? Can you provide the documentation? And this is where you're going to put that information. And then you get the signature of the buyer and the seller, if you could. Signatures are always good. Oh, we froze there. Huh. Did that freeze for you guys? Okay. So revisions to the NPMA 33 form. So I'm going to point out just a couple revisions quickly. I'm not sure what the delay is here. Okay. So, the business license number that has changed. The statement and inspection findings. It changed to wood destroying. Instead of wood destroying insect damage, it's defects now. Evidence of previous treatment. This is a big one. That's actually been removed. So that's that bottom section that's boxed in. So previously we would check for evidence of a previous treatment. So the new NPMA 33 form requires you not to check. However, like I said, if you do see a baiting system at the property, it would be in your best interest to ask. And I would actually just get in the habit of just asking in general, because I can tell you, and I'm sure it's probably happened to you guys as well. You go and do an inspection, you find termite damage, you recommend a treatment, they get an estimate, and then the homeowner says, well, hey, I have had it treated a year ago. So, just in general, you don't have to indicate it on the wood destroying insect report anymore. but I think in general it'd be a good idea to ask that question prior to, because otherwise you don't go back to alter your WDIR report. You have to basically amend it. You add an additional amendment to it, which is unnecessary. And they have to send you the service agreement so you can add the attachment to your wood destroying insect report. And it's just a lot of kind of going back and forth, So one of the other things that I do want to point out is the other change where it says recommend treatment of, that has been changed to recommend action and or treatment. Other than that, most of the stuff on the bottom is not, no major changes there. And then here's the other big change. So section 2. So typically in the past, so this is the guidelines for the NPMA 33 form. In the past, we had a guideline for 5 years. If you've had a treatment done within 5 years, we didn't need to recommend a treatment. And obviously they would have to provide proof that they have it and that it was done within 5 years. Now the guideline is it has to be under current warranty or have an active service agreement with the licensed pest control professional for the treatment of whatever wood destroying insect was found or damage was found at that time of the inspection. So that's a big one. It can be tough because you have properties or you have people who don't keep up on their guarantee or their warranty with the service. And so therefore they could have had it treated 2 years ago. However, and it can produce the paperwork. However, you may have to recommend a treatment based off the guidelines because it's not under guarantee anymore. It's not under warranty. And they don't have a active service agreement with the licensed pest control professional. So that's one of the bigger changes to the NPMA 33 form. Section 3, 4, and 5 haven't changed at all.
So where we had that 5 years before, which kind of now I could go a year and a half, have no service agreement, no warranty, and you may recommend having another treatment, or before you had that, we had it 5 years ago. Here's the paperwork within that 5 year period.
Right. So if you look at section 2, right, that last sentence, if there is no documentation of a liquid treatment by a licensed pest control company within the previous 5 years, unless the structure is presently under warranty or covered by a service agreement with the licensed pest control company, then you would have to recommend a treatment. So if it was within 5 years, it was kind of nice to have that, right, because there wasn't any discretionary between, do you still have an agreement? Do you still have, we get calls all the time and they lapsed on their renewal, and they're selling the property and they've had a treatment 2 years ago, but now we're going back out to retreat the property because they just didn't keep up on the renewal. Does it mean that they have termite activity? No. Does it mean that they actually need the treatment? No, it doesn't. But they, because of this guideline, we're required to recommend the treatment. So it is a tough change to the NPMA 33 form. I personally liked the fact that it said 5 years. Like I said, there really wasn't, we kind of, all played by the rules there, 5 years, and that was it. But right now it is definitely a little bit more of a gray area. So, good. We have some time to spare. Any questions?
So as licensed home inspectors, I know you can't talk about every state, but you're in Connecticut. We can fill out this form legally, right?
So just recently, I've had a meeting with Diane Jersey, who's the director for DEEP, and that was our question. Because we run into it as well, right? We have operators who can do an inspection, but can they legally fill out the NPMA 33 form? And her response was yes, they could. The issue you run into is the fact that because they're not a supervisor license holder, they can't recommend a treatment.
So if I see termites, I can't really fill out the form then.
Well, go ahead.
Because I'd have to recommend treatment.
Not necessarily. There's a way around it on how you word it.
Do you mean the type of treatment, or you can't, like, if
the roof is shot?
I can't say you should replace your roof because I'm not a roofer or a licensed roofer, or are they saying that you can't say the house should be treated because you don't have a S license?
You can't say the house should be treated because you don't have an S license.
Can you word it like recommend further evaluation in that you fill everything out the same as you would, right?
Right.
And then you say recommend further evaluation by a licensed pest control company, and then you can make the determination whether or not to treat, and you can word it in that way. So you're still kind of recommend have somebody come out. Those forms, as you will say, like remember you used to FHA, VA, CHAFA, they had to be filled out all the time, and I'm finding that less and less are asking for those. Is that true on your end?
Yes, they are. I mean, at one point, I'd say maybe about probably right around COVID, everyone was asking for them. I mean, your conventional mortgages, they were asking for them, which typically prior to that, you didn't get a lot of conventional mortgages asking. Your FHAs you did, your VAs you did, but I have seen, yes, less and less of them. VA across the board all the time. That doesn't change. Even VA, they want this form. They want the NPMA 33 form for a refi as well.
Didn't the homeowner pay on that too, rather than the buyer on the VA? Don't they make the homeowner pay?
Yes, the homeowner.
No, that's changed. The buyer can pay now. The seller does not have to pay, I think.
I always thought it was the buyer, and then it switched to the homeowner, right?
No, it used to be that the seller had to pay if you were VA, but that's changed in the last year. The person buying, if he's a veteran, can pay for the termite.
I would just make the buyer, however they do it, pay. They would pay you directly, and then the homeowner reimburse them. That's how it was years ago. I don't know if that changed.
That's changed. They don't have to reimburse anymore.
Okay, no, when they were required to, I just, the buyer had to pay the pest guy, and then the homeowner, whoever, reimbursed. But
yeah, I guess they changed that. I mean, but they do want to pay the receipt.
Yes.
Well, you want to get paid too, so you it's like the septic guy and want to pump it, somebody's.
Well, some inspectors include it in their inspection. And, if you're a veteran, I will include that. And what I do is I give them a paid invoice and I just mark it cash, so, right.
So King, this was this discussion I had with you, and I know other states are different, as you know, throughout the country. But all we want to do as inspectors is just inspect. We don't want to treat. That's where a lot of the money is. Like, we don't want to say, "Hey, treat with terminal or this, that, and the other thing." We just want to identify, and it would be nice if Connecticut came up with something. Maybe some of the other states, Maine, Rhode Island, Vermont, and all these other states came out where you could just identify. I mean, we can do it now, but at least have some sort of licensing for that process rather than, the operator is, how the operator goes, but.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? I agree. I can tell you it's probably not going to happen though. Like I said, we had this conversation with, Diane, and truly, so you have your supervisory license holders and you have your junior operators, right? And so essentially, your junior operators aren't a federally recognized pesticide license.
Correct.
So for us pest control companies, right, we have to have licensed supervisors, holders for whatever type of work we're doing, and we have to provide supervising instructions to the operators. And part of that is because the operators they're not, they're licensed that Connecticut created to try to provide more pest control services and expand it, but because of the restrictions of it not being a federally recognized pesticide applicator, you can't. You're kind of stuck. It actually confused things a lot more now. So the same thing like with you guys. So I mean, like I said, this was a specific question that we asked Diane. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Connecticut Pest Control Association. We meet with her twice a year, and because we get it in our industry as well. And so that was her response was, you know, you can't recommend a treatment, but you can recommend further evaluations by a licensed, you know, pest control provider or a licensed supervisor. And so it's really all about the wording. So technically you can do it, but you have to make sure you're not recommending to treat for it.
So what happens if we do? Do the termite treatment police come and hunt us down? Because I've been doing it for 20 years. So
I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. So, you know, I think here's where you run into the problem, right? I see it often, you know, we see it in our industry. We run into, we just had one.
My home is
someone who wood rot. That's what we run into. We go out to do a termite treatment for wood rot. And so they recommended a treatment, and, you know, my guys will go out to treat the structure, and they'll say, you know, I mean, we had to treat it because we had no choice but to treat it, but the damage that was found was actually rot and not termite damage. So,
well, you can always say, you know, I put in there, recommend further evaluation by licensed pest control and treatment if necessary or needed or something like that. This way, if you go out and say, yeah, he's right, or it happens to be wood rot, you're not looking like a fool or an idiot, and you're still covering your ass, you know?
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it. But it is a little difficult though. You know, and it would be, you know, I mean, it would be nice if they had a separate license and you can just recommend a treatment for whatever type of pest you find. But because of that supervisory license holder, you can't recommend the treatment technically.
And the guys that hold the S license that are inspectors in our state, you know, again, you have to go through all the same thing that you had to go. And it's, and like I said, most of those guys, they don't want to do the treatment. Some of them might have gotten into the business. They just want to do the identification and all that and recommend the treatment and stuff. But they don't want it. They're not putting the chemicals out like you do and doing the treatments and then have to learn all the different treatments and all that.
Right.
I just thought some states have it. I can't remember which states we were looking through it. So I was just going to quickly, I know we got a few minutes left and I want to throw this out. Can you just quickly, we know about, can you just talk about the way you treat all three of these? Carpenter bee, Carpenter, I mean, we kind of termite, we kind of hear about it all the time, but could you just go over, especially powder posts, how's some of those done? Carpenter ants?
Sure. So subterranean termites, like I said, you have to treat the soil. So there's a baiting system. Then you also have a liquid, you know, soil injection. You saw a photo of the guy doing a soil injection there. You're basically treating the soil around the structure. Carpenter ants, there's a couple different ways of treating for carpenter ants. You could treat the colony directly. I mean, you can use a liquid concentrated product. You can use an aerosol. You can use a dust. There's also baits as well, granular baits, gel baits, bait stations. Carpenter bees, you're treating that nest directly. So that borehole is getting treated directly. Typically, it's going to be a dust, but you can also use aerosol products or liquid concentrated products as well. And then a preventative for carpenter bees is to paint or stain the wood or wrap it in aluminum. Wood-borne beetles. So wood-borne beetles, there's a couple different ways to treat that. Typically, we do what's called a borate and basically treat the wood with a borate. It's pretty much a wood preservative. That can be used as well for subterranean termites. So in the wintertime, you know, the ground's we haven't had a winter in quite some time, but in the wintertime, when the ground is frozen, you can't do a soil injection if the ground is saturated or if it's frozen. So what do? You have a real estate transfer. They can't close unless they get this treated. So what we would do, it would be a borate to the framing members, floor joist, box header, sill plate, and that will prevent further damage. It's not a full-blown termite treatment because you're not treating the soil.
It's white. It's white, right?
Right. Well, there's a white powder that you kind of mix, and then there's a concentrated. It's kind of a creamish color that you mix, and you basically treat the wood. You saturate the wood to point of wetness, and then it absorbs the material. And like I said, it's like a wood preservative. So if you have termites that try to consume the wood, they'll die. It won't kill the colony, but it'll prevent further damage. And so that's what you would end up doing in order to have the property close, and then you have to go back and do an actual soil treatment, a real termite treatment, in order to really treat for the colony in the soil. But that same borate is what's used to treat for woodborne beetles. Another way to treat for woodborne beetles is reduce the moisture content. Another application for woodborne beetles is heat, extreme heat. And another treatment could be fumigation. So in that order is what's more common. Your borate and moisture reduction. Heat has become very popular since bed bugs, the reemergence of bed bugs. And fumigations are less and less, partly because of the risk and the cost.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, King, we're gonna end it. Thank you so much for the information tonight. This was very, very good. We'd love to have you back in the future, but this was really, really informative. And thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. If you have any questions, feel free. You can reach out to me. Scott and Jim have my information, have my email. You can shoot me an email. I think if as far as the inspection point and MPMA 33 and making a recommendation, I think if there is consistency amongst the home inspectors, I think you guys will be okay. But it's always, you always get that one who's, recommending a treatment, and then I think that's kind of where you might run into your problem. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, King. Take care, man. Have a good night.
All right.